How y'all are. Uh, I want to make this is number 2 video on knives. I've got some pretty interesting knives I've collected over the years. Some of them I use and some of them I don't. Um, One of the more unique knives I have is this thing, the Wyoming knife. Now, this thing was very popular at one time. A lot of people used them. This is a hunting tool for cleaning game, or at least getting game partially apart. Um, this guy looks like this. It's a pretty unique outfit. Um, I don't know. I've had this knife for several years and not 100% sure what they intend for you to do with it. I think they intend for you to use it to get one open. Be able to go from the base of the neck all the way down to the, between the two back haunches and get a deer open. From there, I don't know what you would do with it. Now, it's got this other blade here, and it's terribly sharp. I suppose you turn it around like this and use it as a skinning blade. But in doing so, you've got the other blades exposed to you. So I'm not sure. I don't know why I've kept this, but I have, and there it is. It's got this little guard that you put back on it right there like that, and it's got a really nicely made leather holster, to put this guy in there. But beyond getting one gutted, I don't know what you would do with it. They make a cheap version of it, and I'm not sure where this come from, but somehow I wound up with it. And this one's made in Taiwan, or what should say that? Yeah, made in Taiwan. The only thing I can figure you do with this thing is, get it opened up. That's it. Unless maybe you're stuck in a tree, you can cut your parachute rod lines with it and get loose that way. Oh, pretty unique. Okay, well, let's move on to something else. As a World War II reenactor, I've collected up a few knives over time that I use in reenacting, which means they basically hang on me, and I don't use them for anything. But if you ever see something like this around, now, when I got this knife, it didn't have a scabbard with it at all, and I made a World War II-esque style scabbard to go with it, okay? This is one of two things. It's either a theater-made knife from World War II, or a knife that was made in the machine shop aboard the ship in transit somewhere, or it might be a blade from the Knife for Life program. Now, in World War II, they realized that everybody needed a knife, okay? So, of some kind. Pilots needed knives, sailors needed knives, soldiers needed knives, officers needed knives. And they basically issued the rifleman a bayonet, and a guy with a carbine or a submachine gun that didn't have bayonet lug on it, they issued a trench knife to of some kind. It might be a 1917 trench knife with brass knuckles on it. It might be an M3 trench knife that's, made like a carbine bayonet. Of course, World War II carbines didn't have bayonets because they didn't have bayonet lugs. But they figured that everybody needed a blade. Everybody needed a knife of some kind. Paratroopers had several. They were equipped with switchblades, machetes, trench knives, bayonets, and You know, they had a lot. There was a program among the public schools in America. Now, most of the public schools in America at that time had industrial arts programs where young people were taught machine shop skills and leatherworking skills and, machine shop repair skills and so forth. So the War Department and the federal government had a thing that they called the Knife for Life program. This is where high school kids could produce combat utility knives for the war effort. I theorized that this is one of them. Now, they had standardized settings for what they wanted. They wanted a certain overall thickness of the blade back at the crossguard. They wanted a certain overall length. They wanted a certain blade width. They wanted a certain angle of grind. They wanted a certain hilt material or strong hilt, okay, and, a certain handle size. This fits those criteria that I've researched. So, is this a school shop made World War II combat knife? I'm not sure, but it meets all of the criteria. So if you see something like this around, you might want to hang on to it because it might have value. I had a World War II collector, dealer, give the appraised value of this knife at $150. I bought it in a pawn shop for $10. So, something to think about. Here's another knife that I bought cheap that has a fairly high appraisal value. This is the Western. I think they call this the G46. It's basically a K-bar style knife with an 8 1/4 inch blade. Western Cutlery produced this knife from about 1943 to 1945, and they sold it through the canteen exchange system. So soldiers could buy this knife privately and take it into theater with them. It has a very long fuller on it, okay? And the fuller, contrary to popular belief, is not a blood groove. It's simply a place for them to clamp that blade when they're grinding the edge. That's what a fuller is for in most cases, okay? Some people will argue that it gives blade harmonics and 100 different excuses, but when it comes right down to it, it gives a place for the jig to clamp onto the blade when it's being ground. Because that guy's starting to get fairly sharp, and you can't hold on to it by hand. It has a split tang in it, and the tang is peened over on the ends as opposed to the pommel being held on by a pin. Okay, and the tang is exposed on both sides, so the leather washers are basically H-shaped. Kind of puts you in mind of a leather-handled east wing hatchet. Okay. This knife's worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $250, or at least every time I see one for sale on eBay or Gunbroker, that's what they want for it. And it's got the original sheath with it, even though the sheath had some damage. This knife is a Powell RH-36. And these knives are manufactured by Southern Railroad under contract. Powell Cutlery, which was part of Remington. This one is not in very good condition. It's been grossly over-sharpened. But this knife is still worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $50. Okay, so if you see an RH-36 out there that's in any kind of condition at all, you might want to think about it. You find something with a straight edge on it, and I'll give you a demonstration of what over-sharpening looks like. Okay, so here's the end of the cutting edge. put this guy up there just like that, and don't cut your finger off doing it. And you can clearly see there's light coming through underneath where that knife edge has been, where it's been over sharpened, which takes a lot of value off of it. But this guy's still worth like $50. Okay. And I carry this in the field a lot. I stick it down the top of my 2-buckle boot, go right on about my business. And it's sharp, If you need a knife, you got one. Oh, that's cinematography right there, buddy. Now, there we go. I'm going to show you a unique knife. A friend of ours down home, Jim Vaught, served in World War II. He got wounded. He was a tanker. And he got wounded, and when he came out of convalescent hospital, they sent him to the Pacific. So we were cleaning out his barn, kind of a pre-estate thing, where he was like, I can't keep this place up anymore. I'm going to get rid of it, like that. We were cleaning out his barn. We found one of his war trunks. And we found this. When I lifted the trunk up, the bottom of it came out because it was sitting on the ground. And it had rotted through. And this knife was in horrible condition, when I first saw it. And it's not in real good condition now. And I picked it up and asked him about it. And he said, just take that with you. He said, it ain't no good to me anymore. I said, well, what is it? What's the deal on it? He said, well, when he got to the Pacific, they didn't have any combat knives. Okay, they didn't have any, couldn't get any combat knives, and he wanted one. All the Marines had K-bars, and he didn't have anything. Okay, being on a tank, it didn't have bayonet, So he cobbled up this Japanese Ariska bayonet and made it into a 7-inch blade combat knife by cutting off the quilling and going to the maintenance guy and filling in the back of it where it would mount on the rifle with weld, okay, and cut the blade off and put a little clip on the front of it and basically made it into a combat knife. And, he died shortly after that. So I've hung on to this knife ever since I was a teenager. Over the years, I got around, I made a scabbard for it. And sometimes you'll see me carrying this thing at reenactments, But it is a truly theater-made combat knife, because I know the guy that made it in theater. We were tearing down a house about 40 years ago, or maybe 50, and I was a teenager. And I found this knife blade. This is a Edgemark brand, Solingen, Germany. Original buoy, it just barely says up here. But I found this knife under a house. And it had a little chintzy brass crossguard on it, which was badly corroded. And I think it had bone handles on it originally, but the mice had eaten the bones. Eating the scales off the knife. So I made me a steel crossguard for it. I guess I was about 20 when I did this. Made me a steel crossguard out of for it. And I couldn't get any rivets or anything, so I ordered some knife handle scales from Dixie Gun Works. And put it on there with screws and nuts. Turned down the nuts on a lathe, made me some little bushings, and put that handle on there. And I've used this a lot. This is my big hunting knife that I use when I go somewhere, not so much anymore, that I need a big hunting knife. And this is the one I use. I actually killed a wild boar with this knife. He almost got me. I just tell you the truth. I wound up on the ground, and you know, the fight was on. But I actually killed a wild hog with this knife. Stabbed him to death with it. So I made me a scabbard for it. I worked apprenticing at a harness shop at the time, and I made this scabbard for it with a pocket on here for the sharpening stone. Found me a little sharpening stone that would fit it, and I made the pocket to fit it. And you know, I've had it for years and years and years. Oh, that's about the size of it for this little knife review. Oh, the first knife I ever made. Oh, wait a minute. The last knife I ever made. Yeah. How about the last knife I ever made? How about the first knife I ever made? Here it is. First knife I ever made. I made this knife in industrial arts class in high school. And in your second year of industrial arts, you can make up your own projects, see. So, you know, the first year you make the screwdriver, and you make the spanner wrench, and you make the little lamp that looks like a water pump, you know, and you make things that are in the set project book. The second year of industrial arts, you get to make your own projects. So I wanted to make me a hunting knife. So I made this, and you know, just ground it all out. You know, the industrial arts teacher come over there and says, "You're not doing that right. You got to keep that blade cool when you're grinding it." So I grind a little, you know, heat treated it, you know, which was another little class that he did on heat treating, because there was a couple other guys making knives too. I had this piece of antler, okay, and a little brass crossguard, a little simple knife. I made a sheath for it then, but it didn't turn out very good. It gave out pretty quick. And then about 5 years ago, I found the knife, and I said, you know, I better make me a scabbard for that thing. And I made this scabbard. And, you know, first knife I ever made. And, you know, I'm not a real high-end knife maker, you know, like Chris Smith or somebody like that down the road, you know, but I can make one. I made this one with a little lap hunter style, you know, Finnish hunter style knife with a, you know, little dangle carrier on it. Just formed the sheath and, you know, sewed it together, put some good strong rivets in it. Away you go. This was an old wore out mill bastard file, but it had the angle. It was one of those files that you can get that already have the knife edge to it. Okay, so I was possessed with a new belt grinder for Christmas a couple of years ago, and I set about making myself a knife. I had a nice piece of antler laying around the house that I'd been sharpening knives on, and set out and made myself a little knife. And I haven't had a chance to use it yet, but it works. Boy, it'll whittle good. It's sharp. It's carbon steel, and it's starting to show a little patina already. But I'm pretty happy with it. All right, then. There's the hunting and stabbing knife review. We'll see y'all. Like, state, certify, commentate, subscribe. Leave me no dollar in the Patreon bucket. Join the NRA. We're going to need them. We'll see you now.